Welcome. Glad you're watching this video. I'm Shane Bennett. I'm here with Greg Livingstone, the founder of Frontiers. And today we're going to talk about Greg and Sally's move to Malaysia late in their career. And I'm excited to hear this story. I know just bits and pieces of it. But Greg, if you could just jump in and tell us how in the world at the age you were, at that stage in your career, you two decided to move to Malaysia. Share that story with us.
Of course, your callings are irrevocable. I knew and still know I'm supposed to be involved in some way in seeing Muslims turn to the Lord Jesus Christ at whatever age I'm at, whatever I can do. Now at almost 82, I'm still at it. But I was general director of Frontiers, up to 2000, but realized that it was getting too big and I wasn't really gifted as an administrator. And so it was time to turn it over to a younger guy who was so gifted, which was Rick Love, who had been many years in Indonesia. We moved back to Pasadena, California, where I was invited to teach at Fuller on church planting among Muslims. Only did that for 3 semesters when I realized that teaching wasn't really where I could make my best contribution, and noticed that most of my students were more interested in their GPA than they were getting involved with church planting among Muslims. Anyway, one of the team leaders in Malaysia said, this isn't my bag. We need to be replaced. And so I said to Sally, well, why don't we go? And she said, sure. We moved to Kuala Lumpur and took over one of the 2 teams that Frontiers had in Malaysia with no language ability to speak of. I like to joke that I know 10 languages and 10 phrases of each. That's because we were moving around trying to help different teams all those years.
I've got to imagine that it wasn't just quite as simple as, let's go. Why don't we go to Malaysia? Okay. And we went to Malaysia. Can you elaborate a little bit on, at the very least, Greg, that it's unusual for somebody at 60 years old at that arc in your career to do something like that. So I'm interested in what Frontiers leadership said, what your church leadership said, what Sally thought about that, because it had to come at least a little bit of a surprise.
Well, first of all, my last year as general director, I'd already connected with Rick Love, and we were spending a year together with him at my side, seeing what he wanted to learn and not learn. So it was long planned, and Bobby Clinton at Fuller had guided us through a leadership transition, which some people said was one of the best ones they've ever seen among mission agencies. The status of being general director meant nothing to me except more issues than I could handle. So we were quite happy, and Sally was immediately happy. She's followed me all around the world without grumbling or worrying about the kids. So it was actually pretty easy. We knew that we could function in Malaysia in English, unlike other places. And the facts were that there was still not one house church even among the Malay majority. And that's the kind of challenge that we live for. So it was an easy decision. We were well accepted. A few people were worried about security. Oh, they're going to find out he was the general director of Frontiers, which actually did happen eventually after about 5 years. But it was just very smooth and very joyful.
What about your kids? How did they factor into that decision?
Well, of course, they were all at university or beyond by that time. Mm-hmm. My 3 sons, they sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, that's exactly what we would expect Dad to do. And none of them were afraid. And particularly Malaysia is known as a pretty easygoing place until recently, at least. They've always known this is what we do.
I would guess that the idea of leading a team was not like, wow, can we do it or not? You demonstrated crazy capacity in that regard. As you look to Malaysia, what were you hoping for from the investment you and Sally would make?
Well, we were hoping to get a little house group of Malays who were following Jesus. Of course, that was the number one goal, and then encourage that to happen in a lot of other places. But what actually happened was that my gifts came into play, and we didn't see anybody converted, but 40 people followed us to Malaysia since we were there. My recruiting gift just kept going. So more teams were formed and in more places, which was, thrilling.
Did anyone tell you not to do this as you began to set your sights to Malaysia? Did anybody say that's a bad idea?
interesting you should say that because, well, actually, it was moving to England 13 years before when my wife was struggling with depression that the chairman of the board said, don't move to England. The first time, actually resigned over that because we do it anyway. When we moved to Malaysia at 60, no one said you should be doing something else. They just kind of smiled, I think.
That is so great. If somebody's watching this video, they've just retired or they've just stepped out of a role or considering stepping out of a role like you at Fuller, about that 60 to 65-year-old zone, and they're thinking, gosh, should we go overseas someplace? In general, what might you say to somebody like that in terms of caution and encouragement?
Well, the first thing I tell them to do is think team. Don't ask yourself what you could do. Ask yourself how you could contribute to a team effort with people with different gifts so that your contribution really counts, makes a difference. And I would remind them that they've got everywhere in the world, they have doctors. For example, in India, they have some of the best doctors in the world. And it's no big deal if you go out in your later years of life and it doesn't seem to work or you don't have the energy or so forth. Thank you for trying it. And that will inspire people in itself.
I love that.
Muslim peoples respect older peoples more than younger peoples. So often people that are 60 plus get an opportunity to get invited in and to share without suspicion that a 25-year-old might face.
I appreciate that. It's so fun to hear some of this story and just kind of put myself into that time and those shoes as you did this. So appreciate that you guys did that. You and Sally, you launched out there. Let me bring this video to a close. In the next episode, we'll examine the early days on the ground in KL. But thanks so much. Thanks for watching this. And if you're in that zone, God has in mind to use you maybe in ways that you don't expect. See you soon.